Hey, good morning. I had to share this amazing sunrise with you. Uh, Fortunately, it doesn't. The video doesn't do it justice. There's amazing colors. But this time of year is a great time of year to celebrate the birth of our Lord, our Savior, the one that makes a huge difference to us in our lives. He is the one we worship. He is the creator of all things, especially this masterpiece this morning that most people are sleeping through Sunday morning. So I'm going to focus on that. Anyway, so this time of year, Christmas time, great opportunity to reflect on how Jesus lived versus how we live and how we can make adjustments. You know, we have a tradition in our family of watching Christmas movies during this time of year. And one of the movies that we just recently watched was It's a Wonderful Life. What a great show. I know my kids don't like the fact that it's black and white, but if you can overlook that, I don't think they've colorized it, or however we say that. I haven't seen that version, but if you can look past that, it's an amazing movie that has so many direct applications to us in our lives and how George lived his life for the benefit of others. But I'd like to take a few minutes and go through some of those events in his life. I know it's a fictional story, but we see people living this way their lives all the time. So if you haven't seen the movie, I'd highly recommend it. It's definitely worth your time. Overlook the fact, like I say, that it's black and white, because it's well worth the watch. The movie starts with a scene of George Bailey and his brother as kids, and they're skating on ice. And his younger brother, Harry, falls through the ice, and George runs to the rescue and pulls his brother out of the ice and saves his life. So, but there's a payment that's made. You know, George ends up losing his hearing because of doing that. Loses his hearing. So the rest of his life he suffers with at least loses his hearing in one ear. So he's got a bad ear and a good ear. And then the next scene, he's in looks like a little small town drug shop that has kind of a convenience ice cream parlor in the front. George is working there. He's probably, 10 or 11. And he notices the guy he works for is really upset. And he reads this telegram about how his son was, he was just notified his son was killed. And so this Mr. Gower is his name. He's very upset, and he does something foolish, careless. He puts poison in these capsules, and George notices it. George doesn't deliver that medication, and when he gets back, he gets a call from this lady like, "Hey, where's my drugs?" And George said he didn't deliver it, and so the druggist, Mr. Gower, actually starts to beat him. And George keeps saying, don't hurt my bad ear, not my bad ear. And George finally gets him to listen, like, "Hey, you gave this lady some poison." And then this guy goes from abusing George to giving him great affection and love because he saved him from making a huge mistake. Well, you know the story. I'll try to speed things up, but his dad works at a bank and loan, and his dad eventually dies, and George had these aspirations to go and travel the world, conquer the world, and get out of Bedford Falls. It's a small little town. But, when his dad dies, he gives up his dreams and stays there to help save the bank and to run the bank. So he paid a price there. And then later in life, George gives his money, his college money, to his brother so that he can go to college. And the plan was he was going to come home and then let George go off to college and explore the world. But instead, Harry comes home married, and Harry's new father-in-law has a business he's very interested in. And so he goes to work for him. So George pays the price again. Crazy. The sacrifices. George was living a life of sacrifice. He was a walking sacrifice. All that he was doing, he knew what was right. He was doing it, even though it cost him greatly. Look at that. So, yeah, the next scene is George finally marries Mary, and all these people give him money. This is back in 1928. Gave him like $2,000, which is like $30,000 these days. And so, as they're leaving town in the taxi or their fancy ride, George notices there's a bunch of people gathered around the bank, and he goes to check it out, and there's a run on the bank. So all these people want to withdraw their funds, but if you know how banks are run, all of their funds they have a small amount of money in deposits for people to withdraw. Most of it's tied up in long-term loans. So he doesn't go on the honeymoon. He's there trying to negotiate with people to see, how much money they would settle for. And his wife pulls out, he doesn't have hardly any money in the bank. His wife takes this money out, their honeymoon money, and says, "We've got this, $30,000. And then he kind of negotiates with customers and the minimum they would be satisfied with to keep their accounts open. So he saves the day. His wife really saves the day. And most women and most men would be very disappointed, upset, and have a miserable honeymoon weekend because their plans changed. This Mary is a higher quality woman, gives him the Google eyes, like she's taken with George, which is how it should be. And so she goes to this old house and dresses us up with different scenes, European scenes, and makes it the best that she can with what she has, even though they have nothing. So, yeah, great quality woman. Eventually, of course, the bank would pay him back their money, and they could go at a later date on a honeymoon. But the timing wasn't right that time. So there's another weird scene in the bank where there's like a black crow flying around in the bank. And I thought, what is this black crow supposed to mean? And a lot of times it's a symbol of death. And the bank really was constantly on the verge of being out of business. And so, and why was the bank always on the verge of being out of business? Because they were making loans to people that no one else would make loans to. And sometimes these people were slow to pay their loans back, or in some cases probably didn't pay them back at all. So because of that, the bank was probably not in the best financial shape possible. And it was like a bad or careless decision away from being bankrupt. Probably all the time. They didn't have a lot of reserves set aside because the way George was running the business, trying to help people. So I wonder, is that the case that we're in sometimes? Or probably all the time. Are we one or two decisions away from being morally bankrupt? One or two decisions. In this life, we're always at risk of, if I make a bad decision, I could spend 60 years, 80 years doing the right thing at all times, and I'm one or two decisions away from being totally morally, ethically bankrupt. I was trying to explain this to my kids. I was away from home for about a month, and what if I decided I was lonely one weekend, and so I go to the bar, start drinking, and get in the car intoxicated, run into somebody, that person gets injured or killed. One or two decisions in my whole life, careless or bad decisions, can take away a lifetime of good reputation or all of those good things you've tried to accomplish. So we're always at risk. So I talk about the careless decisions. That's in one scene, George's Uncle Billy, I think it was his name, carelessly put their deposit in a newspaper and gave it to Mr. Potter, who's the bad guy in the story. And it was $8,000 back then, but today it'd be like $150,000, just a huge amount. And so with that careless decision, the bank would be out of business. So one or two careless decisions could bankrupt us morally or monetarily if we make a bad decision like that too. But George gets the opportunity to see what the world would be like without him. And as he's taking on this heavy burden of how he's going to probably go to jail and the bank's going to be closed and everything he's worked for, his whole life's coming to an end as he sees it because of this careless decision of somebody else, the angel Clarence gives him the opportunity to find out what the world is like without him. Clarence says something like at the end of the movie, after he sees how the world would be different, Clarence says, "Remember, no man is a failure who has friends. And each man's life touches so many others. When he isn't around, he leaves an awful hole, doesn't he?" So even in the worst, darkest times, there is hope. There is a reason to continue. There is a reason to live. There is people waiting to help. A lot of times they don't know. Even George's own wife at first did not know what was going on, didn't know why he was so upset. And it took her a few calls to figure it out. And she rallied the troops to help. She told all of the people that helped, George had helped over the years, "George is in trouble, he needs your help." And they came and they helped. But before all that, some of the chain of events that happened in George's life. Him doing a good deed sent out ripples into the world that had a great effect on many. So what are some of the many great things that didn't happen if George hadn't been born? Of course, by George not being born, his younger brother Harry would have died by falling through the ice. And in turn, we learn later that Harry actually saved a whole company of men on a transport by his efforts. So all of those men would have died. So George saves Harry's life. Harry saves hundreds of men's lives. It's a huge chain of events. We find out later that Mary, his wife, becomes an old maid. Of course, they never have any kids. Mr. Gower, who he'd stopped from delivering that poison, goes to prison by accidentally killing somebody. The bank, of course, goes out of business, which in turn the whole town was transformed into this Pottersville, where there was mostly night and strip clubs everywhere. There was no Bailey Park, where there was less expensive housing, where regular people could find a place to live without paying rent to this awful greedy guy. So, but with all of that happened, there was prices to make. There was a price to bring all those good things about. You know, let's see. So it was a price to make. Life without George in the world was much different. You know, he was trying to choose the best options 100% of the time of his life. But a lot of times, choosing the best things in your life don't feel good. It doesn't feel good. Do you think George felt good about jumping in ice cold water to save his brother? Oh, this is going to feel great. I feel great about this. He didn't even think. He just immediately ran and jumped into that ice cold pool of water to save his brother. I don't think he felt that it felt good to have Mr. Gower beat the crap out of him for doing the right thing until he can talk some sense into the guy. I don't think George felt great in giving up his plans to travel the world. I don't think he felt great giving up his dreams to take over a small town banking, building and loan business when his dreams were to go conquer the world. But how was he to know that his place was to be in this little small town helping a ton of people? He'd do more good there in that little small town than traveling the world doing what he thought was best. So he gave that up. I don't think he felt great when he gave all of his college money to his brother, then have his brother in turn come back and not honor his commitment to his older brother, say, all right, I'm back, it's your turn. It didn't happen. Didn't feel great. Sure, it didn't feel great to not go on a honeymoon. And I'm sure at first he was tempted, but he didn't feel great about turning away Mr. Potter's very lucrative job opportunity presented to him, which I'm sure that wouldn't have worked out somehow, but he was offering him a ton of money to come work for the bad guy. So the point is, do what you know is right 100% of the time, and your life will be filled with joy and happiness. Not what feels good, but what is good, and what brings the greatest benefit to others.